Welcome back to the Futurist New Deal podcast. I'm here with Paul Spiegel, a man whose a resume speaks for itself, spoken at countless symposium, has an incredible wealth of knowledge in biomedicine and legal matters relating to our community. Sorry for the false start, Paul. It's an honor to speak with you. It truly is. Post us hello. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well, thank you, Ben. Thank you for the kind words. It's always an honor to be interviewed by somebody with an audience like yours. So I do appreciate the opportunity. I'm not sure I've met your dog. Who is it?
Yeah. This is Poe.
Poe.
He's a little Chihuahua. He's made a few appearances in the debates and things.
Poe is in Edgar Allan or Bronson?
It's short for Pogue Mahone, little colorful bit in Gaelic.
Yes, you'll have to explain it to me sometime. For the moment, Poe, it's a pleasure to meet you. If you weren't virtual, I'd reach out and pat you on the head.
Oh.
Yes. So, right, let's get down to business. I've got plenty of time for an interview, but not much more. So.
Yes, and thank you for agreeing to do this. It means a lot. So in the pre-interview, we spoke a little bit about the landscape of emerging biomedicine and how we implement that in the best way for the public. Beyond these being boutique services, which in the United States, to some degree, these things are. We haven't been doing our due diligence as a civil society and governing bodies to see that people are getting these services. We've alluded to this before. Tell us how do we fix that?
Well, the United States has a problem. We've got all this technology coming up. We are presently the world's leader. I would have said 10 years ago we will always be the world's leader, but I don't think that's going to be the case for much longer. It's all tied into the problems that we have with allowing biomedical innovation to proceed with only the necessary amount of government oversight and interference, not more. In the United States right now, we have a big problem with anything new. There is always a knee-jerk reaction when somebody comes along with a new therapy, a new drug, a new methodology. First off, there's the FDA, which is really an antiquated organization that only recently has begun to start addressing the fast-paced needs of this new medicine. Now, I can't fault the FDA. Before they got involved in these things, we had things like thalidomide babies, which you may not be old enough to remember, but it was rather horrific. It was a nice little sedative that pregnant women were given to calm them down. And what do you know? It turned their children into, shall we say, anatomically imperfect beings who are still alive and still around today. So we do need regulation. We do need oversight, but we also need an understanding that what's happening in medicine right now and what is needed in medicine right now is happening so fast that the old ways don't work well. Now, the government has pretty much stood in the way for a long time. It takes years and $1 billion to get a new drug approved right now. $1 billion kind of narrows the benefit of that drug, at least during the period of patent, because it's going to be expensive to buy at that price. We don't have government funding for the most part. So your $1 billion has to be amortized somehow. How do drug companies make back all that money? Well, it's a rhetorical question. I'm sure you know. They charge sometimes life-threatening prices for biopharmaceuticals. Insulin in this country is so expensive that people die trying to ration it out. They don't give themselves enough. It's like the inverse of a drug overdose. You're taking this stuff, you're injecting it, and you're not getting enough, so you die. Okay, that's horrible. Nobody in this world should die because the drugs that will save their lives, common, ordinary, easily available, well-known drugs, are so expensive they can't afford them. And I think we're about the only country, certainly the only developed country, where that happens. That is a problem that government has not yet fixed and has not really chosen to fix. Donald Trump said when he was running that he would fix the problem. He's been at it now a year and a half, and he's still making noises about it, but he hasn't really fixed the problem. The last thing he did very recently was to allow importation of pharmaceuticals from Canada, bulk importation of pharmaceuticals from Canada, where they're cheaper. Why are they cheaper? Because the Canadian government makes sure they're cheaper. Could we do the same thing in our country? We sure could. But we don't, we won't. We have no political will for it. We do have the technology for these things. But when it gets up to Congress, when it gets up to the Senate, and often when it gets to the presidency, what happens is that money and power get in the way of good medicine, of life extension, of the ability of people to maximize their potential by not being in a situation where they can't afford to stay well.
And my feeling is also that the political will is there. 80% of people in polls of these kind are suggesting that they would support the set of regulations that you described that would allow for lower drug prices and a more robust public health service. We have a subversion of that political will in many forms in our country. But as you mentioned, also you alluded to a balance in other areas. We have a right to try in recent years. Not a small step this administration's made. Most people in our community, as you alluded to, feel that this does not go far enough. We should perhaps be considering right to try that's not merely for people who are at the point of being very sick or dying. And it's a point that you made that I think bears repeating to all, that this would reduce costs, because that $1 billion and that long runway would be removed from the equation in developing new medications. This is a big part of this problem. The United States is in some ways a kind of research and development testing ground and staging area for a lot of these things, and anything that we can do to be reducing those costs. So how do you see that balance between these two extremes? The regulatory concerns on one hand that would be saving lives by reducing costs in the interest of creating a public health service and lower costs, versus streamlining and removing techno-sluggishness from the regulation at the other end of the spectrum.
Well, I think the first thing you have to ask yourself is, if 80% of the United States electorate believes that something should be done, why isn't it getting started? We have a problem in this country, which is that the electorate is a voice that is often ignored by the Congress and the administration. And that's kind of the situation that we have here right now. I'm not a political activist. Well, I am in the sense that we are supporting public funding for healthy aging, but I'm not about to go out and stand in front of the White House gate with a big, huge picket sign saying, if 80% of the country wants it, why does 100% of the government stand against it? It's not 100%, of course, but that's the slogan and that's the point. We don't always get what we want in this country. We get what we're told we're going to get. And good progressive healthcare, especially for the purposes of longevity, is a problem. Now, again, we go back to the thalidomide example. Some regulation, some testing is absolutely essential. Otherwise, you're a biohacker putting stuff in your body that you don't really know. That's fine for the biohackers. Don't get me wrong. I have good friends in the biohacking community, but they know exactly what they're doing, or at least they think they do. And they're not taking people in off the street and saying, here, roll up your sleeve and let us inject you with this new stuff. We haven't really figured out whether it's safe yet, but here, roll up your sleeve. No, that's kind of insane. Somewhere in the middle between the biohackers and the dangerous substances yet untested to determine their toxicity even, or their morbidity, somewhere in between, there is a level where individuals need to be able to make these decisions for themselves. As you may know, I founded a company not long ago called Libertas Biomedical.
Yes.
Libertas is a very, very early stage company but we are looking around the world for friendly jurisdictions where people can come and work with established scientists to administer or have administered drugs that have passed phase 1 clinical trial for toxicity, let's say, or sometimes phase 2 clinical trials for efficacy, but which still face a long and expensive road in the FDA to approval. Now, phase 1 and phase 2 do not guarantee approval. They don't even guarantee that somebody missed something in the toxicity trials. But it's a good enough start that there are people who want to take advantage of these drugs and therapies long before they are actually approved by the United States government, sometimes the EU government. And what Libertas Biomedical is doing is seeking out friendly jurisdictions which understand that an individual's right to have administered to him things of his own choosing are worth promoting.
Absolutely.
We are talking right now to the government of the Republic of San Marino, very early stage discussions, but I was over there last summer meeting with senior government ministers. I went over there with Aubrey de Grey and Barbara Kretchkoff, by the way. They were good enough to back me up and make me look like I had some importance in the world. Anyway, we are also looking at other places as well. The idea of a micronation is very attractive. San Marino, for instance, is the third smallest nation in the world. It has a population of approximately 33,500 people. It has a landmass a little more than half the size of San Francisco. It's really a very modest sized country in terms of population, in terms of landmass, but it is a sovereign state. It's the world's oldest republic. It belongs to nobody. It's not a member of the EU. It's not. It's not a pirate nation. San Marino is extremely sophisticated, extremely well managed, extremely well. Go there and find out for yourself. You'll find yourself singing in the streets. And a small disclaimer on that: I have just learned that I have been appointed and will soon be sworn in as the honorary consul for the Republic of San Marino for San Francisco area, California, Arizona, Utah, and Nevada. So I do have a direct personal relationship with the Republic, but it's a very good example of a government that is enlightened, that's farsighted, and they can move quickly and is interested. I can't say they will do it yet, but they are interested in hearing what we have to offer. It's very promising. There are other countries that also have this status. One of the members of the Liechtenstein royal family is very interested in longevity. I spoke to him at a conference, and it's a possibility we could arrange something there. Some of the island nations also have sovereignty, and for the moment, at least, they have territory. There's an interesting question: what will happen when one of them washes under the ocean when sea levels rise? But if they carry their sovereignty with them, in spite of the fact that they have no territory, there may be enormous possibilities for these countries to allow the kind of research and the kind of treatment that you just don't get in the United States right now. We're looking into that.
And we mentioned a political will and a political literacy around public health concerns. My feeling is that, and speaking of San Marino, let's say for a moment, I mentioned Estonia and the implementations that they have on certain measures. Places like Liechtenstein or San Marino are more developed than Estonia. Estonia has had this particular focus on blockchain and digitalization in government, but these are very wealthy countries with very good outcomes of other kinds. By virtue of the small size of San Marino, I think that you could have this specific public health implementation where you have the full monitoring of all citizens with life extension in mind in a relatively short time and such a small population. You could then be saying we have basically a nation of immortalists here now, maybe not quite going so far, but saying that we have such an ability to monitor and implement preventative measures that now this is the kind of thing that I would imagine could create that political will in other nations to have a few countries that have had even modest successes in full monitoring and automation of the public health service and AI oversight of this kind. You are someone who is uniquely positioned, I believe, to be seeing all of those chess pieces being moved around, and as you've said, moving them yourself in under the aegis of Libertas and other organizations.
Well, I'm certainly doing my best there. As you've said correctly, that a country like San Marino, with a few thousand people, not even 100,000 people, is a good place for this sort of thing. There are other countries, of course, that would be interested as well. It's a little complicated to monitor a guy who makes his living sailing a canoe out into the Pacific to chase fish. Your monitoring device has to allow for that kind of hard work. Likewise, in San Marino, it is an interesting combination of a fairly sophisticated urban center surrounded by quite beautiful farmland. Many of the citizens of San Marino are not urbanites. It's a really interesting microcosm there. It's like this beautiful medieval country with a modern overlay. You've probably seen the pictures of the tower looking out over the green fields. Well, we don't just persuade the citizens who work in finance and government. We need to persuade the guy with the vineyard out the way. And it's not something that we have proposed in detail at this point. However, I have had meetings with the Minister of Social Security, essentially the Minister of Health. And of course, I'm going to San Marino in October to be sworn in as an honorary consul. And at that point, there will be more than a few high-level government ministers present, and I can bring this up. It's something we can talk about further at a later date. The idea of monitoring 33,500 people is not out of the question.
Yes.
Even if 10% of them or 20% of them just reject it because they're 70 years old and working their farmland and they just don't see any need for it, it's still possible to monitor a sizable population. Of course, that would require funding. If somebody was interested in doing this, San Marino or Nauru or Liechtenstein or Andorra or any of these places would be a wonderful place to investigate this. Monitoring is particularly attractive because it's not invasive. It doesn't do much. It just watches. And it's not like you're asking somebody to have chips implanted in their skin or filaments, as Elon Musk is doing in the brain. That's hard to explain to a man that runs a vineyard. But having him wear a digital watch on his wrist, that's something that doesn't really cause a lot of problems. And I think it might be valuable. The problem that we have, and monitoring is a good one, is that many people really don't think about their health until there's a visible problem. I think I mentioned the story of a prominent physician that I know who found out that he had a tumor the size of a large grapefruit. Now, this guy was no idiot when it came to medicine. He'd been practicing medicine for 40 years. He was well known, he was well respected, and he had this tumor about so large growing inside of him until one day he finally admitted that something might be wrong and went in for a scan. Now, let me tell you something about scanning technology if you don't already know. It's amazing. It is absolutely amazing. They could find a tumor the size of your shirt button, and they could measure it, and they could look at it in 3D, and they could know exactly where it was with stereotaxis. The idea that a tumor the size of a grapefruit could grow unnoticed in a man with impressive medical knowledge kind of speaks to the problem. We don't look to our health until something's broken. And we need to do better than that. We need to make sure it's not just like, oh, I smell smoke. I think I'll wait for another 6 months and see if it's still smoking, and then I'll call the fire department. No, we don't even want to get to that point. We want to
Hmm.
be able to look around our houses and say, oh, look, there's a lot of dry brush around the perimeter of the house. You know, if somebody tossed a cigarette in there, it could cause a fire that would burn down the house. I think we'd better take a look at that dry brush and cut it away. It's perhaps
Hmm.
a homey analogy, but you don't just wait until you smell smoke. You've got to look at yourself and determine long beforehand whether or not there's the possibility of a fire.
Mm. And it's not just an oversight. It is an expense. So I don't recall the precise statistic, but it was an overwhelming number. Something like 85% of healthcare costs are going to these emergency, basically what are emergency services. Some condition is overlooked, as was in the case with this gentleman, was in the case with Steve Jobs. Who had access, who should have had access to also world-class healthcare. But these things were overlooked, and and it ends up being an enormous amount of the money is spent on trying to put out fires, as you mentioned, rather than pennies on the dollar being spent to maintain someone's health at a better level by just having the information that we need and better using. We have big data being used for all sorts of things in this country, somewhat frivolous things. In some cases, they're valuable contributions to the marketplace. But in a certain light, those things are not being used for promoting human development or better outcomes to the highest degree. But we could be doing this in public health. And you mentioned, alluded to a little bit of ideas around micronations and planned communities for techno-optimists. My feeling is that an undertaking that you've described in San Marino is a better use of the resources of people in the techno-optimist community because we can then become that shining beacon on a hill where we've said, now we have this community of people who are effectively life extensionists. This is a much less expensive way to be doing things. We can then be a model to the entirety of the developed world for reorienting how we approach public health and becoming a far more efficient and humane human race as a result.
Yes, that's quite true. It's interesting that you should mention a shining beacon on the hill. I urge you to look up online and take a look at a couple of pictures of San Marino. It is not a hill, it's a mountain, Monte Titano, but it really fits that image quite well. Yeah, we should be able to do this. By the way, I'm not sure you're right about Steve Jobs.
Mm.
Jobs did have access to the very best medical treatment. I didn't know him personally, although I met him once. He was very much on top of his medical care. He fought his pancreatic cancer with a rather remarkable degree of intensity, which is how he did everything. I don't think he overlooked it. He may have overlooked it at first, but he lived for a long time fighting this cancer. Now, overlooking cancer is not necessarily a sin. I think I may have told you I had prostate cancer about 4 years ago. I told my doctor to do a PSA test. Simple, easy, take some blood. They were taking it anyway. Test it for everything you can test it for, especially PSA. She did one, and it came in fine. And then she forgot for about 3 or 4 years. When we finally had it tested again, some other doctor did this in connection with some minor surgery. It came in so high that people were stunned. It came in at 35 at first. Now, anything over 4 gets you into medical treatment. It came in at 35, and we thought this had to be an outlier. It had to be an anomalous result. So we tested it again. It came in at 43. And I went into high gear with every treatment they could administer at the intensities where at one point I was doing radiation therapy for 9 weeks every day. And I said, hey, I seem to be feeling pretty good. Why don't we do 10 or 11 weeks just to make sure? They said, absolutely not. If we do another 5 days of this, we'll compromise your spine and you'll be paralyzed. I'm very aware of my own health, but somebody forgot to do the test. And yeah, I probably should have read over the results every time and said, hey, wait, where's the PSA? But I trusted my doctor to do that for me. That was her job. And she let me down, but I'm fine. Thank you very much. My doctor has informed me there's no evidence of disease. I guess I did what I needed to do. But that was about 2 years of my life where I really had a very important job to do. It had nothing to do with longevity. It had nothing to do with transhumanism. Strike that. It had a lot to do with longevity, my longevity. It was a very personal project, and it came out very well. So you can't necessarily blame somebody for not being monitored. You can blame them for not trying to be monitored. You can blame them for feeling a pain in their stomach and saying, oh, it's probably nothing, to allow that tumor the size of your shirt button to grow to a tumor the size of a baseball, and then the size of a grapefruit. You can blame them if they overlook the warning signs, because everybody should know, everybody should care, everybody should be empowered and provided with the necessary means and technology to be able to make sure that they stay healthy for as long as they possibly can. That's my feeling.
The that's an incredible testimony, and I'm glad that we mentioned this before in another pre-interview. I'm glad that you are well, sir.
Thank you.
Because, not just on a personal level, but because you have so much important work that you've done and continue to do as well. And some of that work relating to a legal field. We're talking about this set of concerns in biomedical terms, but the gaps that would lead to someone like Steve Jobs not being able to find his pancreatic cancer at the earliest stage, not being able and the gaps that you described a moment ago in this system. The legal system is a good example of how we could use advanced algorithms to fill in those gaps as well. There's any number of subfields in which we could say that are not fleshed out in the way that they could be if we had advanced algorithms in every facet of that system. For example, people have said that the bail system could be removed and replaced with some other kind of thing. Advanced algorithms could allow for any number of things. In a pre-interview, I believe you mentioned that it's about 20% of the entire U.S. economy is medical services and things of this kind. But there's a very real sense in which that number could be far, far higher if we were doing a true service to everyone. If we were filling in those gaps, we could say of the medical and legal systems that we could be using automation and advanced algorithms to really do right by everyone, so that we don't have to have people. You have so much knowledge of these systems, and yet even with your ability to speak to these physicians, they were not able. There were these mistakes on their part are being made in a lot of ways, and we hope that in the context of all of these emerging technologies around advanced algorithms, that we can be making the best possible use of those to improve these systems. How do you see are there any particular areas that you would see being improved upon using decentralized and advanced technology to build these out?
Quite certainly. AI is very good at spotting mistakes that people make. For instance, if the hospital that was looking over my medical charts and medical records had a simple AI system to look over what my doctor was doing, it would have looked and said, 2011 ordered PSA test, 2011 patient requests continuous PSA testing, August, 2011 patient requests testing of all relevant variables. And then it goes through, 2012 PSA test, et cetera, et cetera. 2013, no PSA test, no testing of A, B, and C relevant variables. And then it puts up a flag. It says, hey, are you sure? Now, doctors do this all the time. I think that the reason that my physician missed the lack of a PSA test was that she was, as many doctors are, a harried physician who was just going through the stuff. And she looks down the list and she sees that nothing is out of range. You know, you've got your bar graph and there's H on one side and L on the other side and high, low. And as long as something comes up and it's not abnormal, oh, yes, there's a little flag for an out of range result or an abnormal result. And it's a big bold letter on the charts that I was looking at. And if it's there, you look at something. If it's not there, you just look down the list. You see no big bold letters and everything's okay. Well, it is as long as everything is there. But when you forget something, it doesn't come up with a big bold letter because nobody's monitoring that. Now, we could do AI very easily to look and make sure, basically, to look over the doctor's shoulder and say, okay, this all looks good. This is what's requested. This is what's warranted. Oops, looks like you forgot something here. Double check this result. And then the physician gets notified. And he or she looks at this and says, oh my God, we forgot to do PSA. Now, this happens a lot. I don't know how late stage I was in my cancer because I didn't want to know. I knew it wasn't stage 1. I knew it wasn't stage 2. The difference between 3 and 4 is kind of grim, but it wasn't going to affect my treatment any. It was just a way to be characterized by my medical team. So I told them not to tell me, and that's fine. And we went through and we administered the strongest treatment they thought I could stand. And indeed, that worked out really very well. I'm quite pleased with the results. I talked to a nurse practitioner some years ago about my chart, and my physician, Charles Ryan, who at the time was at UCSF and is kind of the sun god of prostate cancer, had made all kinds of exclamation points in the chart. And the nurse practitioner looked at this and says, there's a lot of these in here. I don't know that I've ever seen exclamation points like this. I'll tell you, physicians like Dr. Ryan don't put in exclamation points for patients who are doing poorly and dying, because that's nothing to exclaim about in the cancer business. That's just the way it goes. The exclamation points must have been something positive, or they wouldn't have been there at all. And, you know, I did very well there. However, I was going in for follow-up treatments and going in for regular quarterly hormone injections. And every time I'd go in for a hormone injection, the doctor would run a set of labs. And one day I went in and I looked at my labs and she'd forgotten something rather important. She'd forgotten to do a PSA test. Now, this is an oncologist, hematologist who was monitoring my case. You would think that she would remember that this was relevant. Well, I had a few words with her about this. They were not soft and fuzzy words. It turns out that there was no problem, but she should not have missed that. When somebody is treating for prostate cancer, their PSA level, you know, is one of the most important things on the chart. And if it's not there, you should notice. Now, AI would notice. I had two physicians who didn't.
And so a fair part of my training is in curriculum development and education. And it's one thing that's so often described as moving as close as possible to a 1-to-1 teacher to student ratio. And I mention this only because I think that we can apply the same principle to, you mentioned a harried physician having a lot of clients, a big workload. That's a problem in terms of public health outcomes. And it's not one that we can necessarily blame the individual for, but it is a problem. It's just a systemic problem nonetheless. We can hew to the spirit of improving that with these advanced algorithms and monitoring systems that we've described, and with automating and getting network effects from a lot of people making use of those. It will be improving those systems as well. It's clear to me that it's something that you have given a lot of thought, and it's something that not a lot of people have. And you know, and the personal your personal experience, do you think that that's driven you to want to see us excel in these fields as well?
Well, absolutely. And we will excel in these fields. This is what humans do.
Mm,
You know, we're like cats chasing mice. The minute you hear that little whisper of mouse sound, you go chasing after it because, yeah, you know, this could be dinner. This could be good. This could help humanity. This is cool.
mm,
And we do it very much like a cat chasing a mouse, not just because we need to eat, but we do it for the sheer joy and pleasure of it. It's what we do. And it's what we will do. It's what transhumanism is all about. Transhumanism says life's pretty good, but you know something? We can do a hell of a lot better.
mm,
The usual model is say life's pretty good, so what?
mm,
But we're like that cat chasing the mouse. We want to do more. We want to get farther. And, you know, when it looks like there's a tantalizing possibility out there, we chase it. We go
mm,
after it and we do all kinds of incredible things.
mm,
I wouldn't go so far as to say that we've got mind uploading going on yet, but we're moving towards it. There are serious, reputable people who think this can be done.
mm,
You know, I had drinks the other day with some folks from Nectome.
mm,
They are very serious about what they're doing, and it was an extremely stimulating conversation. But we
mm,
get there step by step. The
mm,
simple idea that you could come up with a basic AI to look over a doctor's chart and say, here's what you ordered, here's what you got. It would
mm,
save
mm,
doctors an enormous amount of time and an enormous amount of trouble. It would save poor guys like me from having to walk in and find out that their PSA level had skyrocketed to levels that were essentially signals of the end of your existence. I didn't
mm,
like to hear that, but I'll be damned if I was going to accept it. And that's the
mm,
other thing about transhumanism is we hear bad news all the time.
mm,
That doesn't mean that we just say, yeah, man was born just to die, three
mm,
score and 10, you know. No,
mm,
we go out and we try and do better.
mm,
Now, as far as medicine goes, there's a good work being done right now with AI looking over radiology results. I know radiologists who are thanking their lucky stars that they're near retirement right now because in
mm,
10 years, a lot of what they do won't be necessary. Pattern recognition is something that AI does very well.
mm,
And if you're looking for that shirt button sized tumor in somebody's brain,
mm,
um, if it's at the wrong angle or if it's, you know, the wrong composition or if it's just the wrong time of the night when your radiologist is reading the results, they may miss it.
mm,
That AI is less likely to do that. Now, is it perfect? Is it in use in broad ways? No, not yet. But then humans progress. We move forward. We start here and we wind up way out there in the future. Maybe it's on Mars. Maybe it's somewhere else.
mm,
Maybe it's non-biological substrate where 100 million people are living in a gigantic database, all happily interacting with themselves because that's where they decided they wanted to be.
mm,
We don't really know, but as transhumanists, we're looking for the far goal. We're not accepting what we've got. We think we can
mm,
do better. And that's what
mm,
we do.
mm. And I think that it's incredible that you're able to bring to the conversation the Sen's founder, Aubrey de Grey. It's incredible that you're being honored in this way as a luminary in San Marino's legal world as a transhumanist. We don't have that recognition necessarily in the United States. Techno optimists and futurist thinkers, they just don't have that kind of a platform on which to stand in the same way. And in a small place like this, I think that it almost could become like a reality show. I hate to describe it in those terms, but I think that for people to see this example of a place that's taking a different approach, and with a population size, that could be monitored by just a handful of centers, 35,000 people, you could really it becomes more of an object lesson than tens or hundreds of millions of people, and also just a far shorter runway in getting those services. Like you mentioned, certain specific fields of medicine, radiology is being automated, and maybe that has an effect on people's livelihoods. But by and large, the effect is just that people were being able to do an awful lot more with less and still being able to work in their fields. I do believe that. Do you see?
That's quite true.
Yes, yes.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Do you see other disciplines, any upsides or downsides in the near term relating to advanced algorithms?
Yes, good and bad. First off, I should say that I am not being honored by the Republic of San Marino for my work in this field. I am very honored to be named, or I will be named in early October as the consul here, but I feel like I'm just doing a job. There is nobody right now representing the interests of the Republic in the Western United States, except for the esteemed Ambassador Belefi, who is out of New York. And he is a good man, but he's representing a small country in a big one. And he doesn't have local resources. I was talking to Ambassador Belefi in the context of Libertas, in the context of longevity generally. He was very kind to grace us in New York City a month ago at Life Extension Advocacy Foundation's Ending Age-Related Diseases Conference. I sit on LEAF board and I was a sponsor of the conference. I invited Ambassador Belefi to join as my guest for the second year in a row. And for the second year in a row, this very busy diplomat sat through lectures of some of the best scientists in the world, happily and avidly absorbing what we had to offer. Now, perhaps my connections with the Life Extension Advocacy Foundation, with the longevity community generally, and with the transhumanist community generally had something to do with my nomination. But to be perfectly frank, I offered my services. They had nobody anywhere on the West Coast. And it's not, I mean, this is a small nation. It's not like I get a black horse outside my door with a plumed guy with an old rifle standing guard. I'm here to serve. Citizens of San Marino need somebody to help them out in California, Utah, Nevada, or Arizona. I'm it. I am honored to serve, but I don't think that somebody looked me up on the internet and said, "Oh, we're going to give Paul Spiegel this great honor." It's service. And one thing I can tell you, I've learned this through, among other things, studies of Amazonian shamanism for the last 10 years, that we are always at our best when we are of service to others. That is really the human goal. More than wealth, more than fame, more than power or honor, we are always at our best when we're of service to others. And that's what I do.
And I think even the more so that you have that in those insights into super longevity that creates value in what you do. And I think that whether you're being specifically honored for that work, I want to honor you in that regard because that is a substantive contribution. Your company Libertas, it alludes to the right to try, the name,
Yes.
and the freedom to try. Are there? We mentioned a moment ago subfields of medicine. Are there any specific medicines or areas that you want to see more latitude, as well as these disciplines?
Yes, I think particularly senolytics is a very valuable field of research. Full disclosure, I provide legal services for and own shares in a couple of different companies that are working in this field. So if anybody wants to challenge me for conflict of interest, here it is. I think senolytics is important enough that I give my services to these, or I sometimes sell my services to these companies, and I own shares in them. It's a big deal. For the kinds of therapies that these guys are working on, I'm thinking particularly of Ocean Biomedical and similar companies. For them to be able to actually go to market will take years, and it will take a lot of money. If we could establish a location where once their drug is far enough along, they could open up shop and provide it to people who are able to go there. That could be a game changer. Now, there's always the risk that somebody will roll up their sleeve, get injected with whatever we've got, and, fall back and die. But that risk is very small. It's there for anything. I suppose you know the statistical risks of getting in your car and driving somewhere. Well, you don't really pay attention to them because the risks are small and you feel like they're acceptable. If somebody feels that way about, say, senolytic therapy, it should be offered to them long before the United States government comes around and says, yeah, now they may actually die. You might die the next time you get in your car, but you know the risks and you take them. And most of the time, you don't. So there we go. I've been in a few car accidents. I got other people's body parts in my shoulder due to a motorcycle accident some years ago. They do happen, and occasionally people actually die in the process. That doesn't stop us from getting on our motorcycles or getting in our cars or hang gliding or parasailing or skiing or scuba diving or base jumping in a squirrel suit or whatever. We do all this stuff. And yeah, sometimes people actually die, but mostly they don't. And then mostly we continue because it's worth it to us. I don't know about the squirrel suit, but if somebody wants to do it, more power to them. So that's kind of the situation right now. Now there are other solutions that are perhaps less life-threatening, but just as valuable. I am involved with a company called Innovium Labs. Innovium is a medical tourism company. We help people to find, in the present iteration, we help people to find ovarian rejuvenation techniques that exist outside of the United States, which are not yet approved here. We're hoping to have them approved, but in the meantime, if somebody thinks our techniques are worthwhile, if they check them out for themselves with their own physicians, if they look them over carefully and decide that this is right for them, Innovium will help to connect them with a foreign clinic that provides treatments that are not available in the United States and which appear, again, I'm no physician, but which appear to be highly superior, produce results that American physicians can't produce. So that's another example of people going elsewhere for treatments that they want but can't have. And that's happening all over the world. There's an association of medical tourism companies I'm a member of, and the people are going all over the place. You want a hip replaced cheaper than it can be done in the United States? Go to Bumrun Prad Hospital in Bangkok. It's one of the best. They have foreign trained physicians, often American trained physicians, doing the same work here that they do at the Mayo Clinic or UCSF or whatever. Sometimes they have degrees from UCSF. They'd just rather practice in Thailand. There are plenty of other places as well.
And we can imagine. I've been accused of always wanting to talk about Neuralace, but we can imagine in this community of facilitators for right to try in the most general sense, that some of the things that might be only limited to a person in a locked-in state or quadriplegic, like Neuralace. Right now there's no human trials at all for Neuralace. There's a monkey that has this, but they're looking at it 18 months having it in humans. At that time, I would be interested in going to China or going somewhere and having this integrated. Very quickly, do you think that these few organizations that you mentioned could be facilitating things of this kind specifically for technofuturists?
They could be, yes. For the moment, we're not.
Yeah.
But once the model is established, once you've learned how to help people to go abroad to find the treatments that they can't have here, once you have forgive me for being a lawyer, once you have your documentation in place that makes it very clear that what you're doing is not applying medical treatments, but simply facilitating people's search for medical treatments, then once you find a treatment, once you investigate it sufficiently to believe that it's worth adding to your stable, as Innovium is doing, then you can pursue that treatment. You got the model down. You know what you're doing. It's rather like Bummer and Prod. They know how to fix foreigners' hips or knees or whatever. They're really good at it. And they didn't start off as one of the largest medical centers in East Asia. They grew into it because once they found the model, they expanded on it.
Mm-hmm. And there's so many interesting ideas around senolytics, personalized medicine, microtechnology in these contexts. There's so many things that we could be going into across the legal and emerging biomedical spectrum. But we just have a few moments left. What is the takeaway that you would have for people in our community? What is the advice that you would give for how we should orient our thinking and efforts towards the best near-term implementations of biomedical outcomes?
I think the first thing I would say is not to be deterred by the people who think you're out of your mind.
Mm-hmm.
Serious scientists have often been wrong when they've said that people were out of their mind. Lord Kelvin, famous for the Kelvin scale, among other things, was one of the most revered physicists of his day. And in 1900, he made a very firm pronouncement with all of his prestige behind him that heavier than air flight was not feasible and that it would never work. And he would never get into a heavier than air vehicle. If he were going to fly, it would be in a balloon. That was 3 years before the Wright brothers. Lord Kelvin lived long enough to see that proven wrong. There will always be people who say, you can't do that. How the hell could you possibly land a man on the moon? A Mars colony? You're out of your mind. Well, yeah, we did it with the moon, but Mars, that's way out there. No, people will always say it can't be done. And then they'll come along and basically eat crow when they find out that somebody did it anyway.
And it was 8 years that we went with it, where we said people were saying it's madness to go to the moon. It was 8 years we did it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Because we had the will, we had the drive, and frankly, we had the threat of the Russians doing it before us, and we didn't like that very much. So we managed to mobilize in a way that got us there very quickly. Now, there are some people who suggest that one of the best things that could happen to the Earth as a whole would be a short, small contact by hostile aliens. I know that sounds strange, the pirate spaceship theory or whatever, but the bottom line is that if 24 hostiles showed up on our planet from somewhere else, we'd realize that this wasn't just China's problem, it wasn't just India's problem or Bolivia or wherever they landed. No, this was something that we all had to deal with, and it would cause the world to pull together in a way that so far, at least, the world has never pulled together. Hell, we're not even addressing climate change. We might just kill ourselves because we can't sit down and agree. We might turn our planet into a barely inhabitable rock. Now, tardigrades will probably still survive, so life on Earth will continue. There's plenty of tardigrades out there, but I'm not friendly with any of them. So I would say do it. Believe that the future can be attained, and believe that you and I and all of us can attain it. We need to move forward with this. We need to continue our work, because the work that we do today that is derided as insane may be the seminal science 20 years from now. We're here. We're doing it.
Yes. And, it's just been an honor to speak with you, Paul Spiegel. You have you are at the vanguard of so many areas of interest to techno-futurists. And thank you for these insights. Thank you for sitting down and speaking with me. Please, sir, I hope we get a chance to speak again. Because it's just an honor to be getting some of these ideas from you.
I'm sure we'll have a chance to speak again. I entirely expect that you will become a candidate for president of the United States. I know that you're running through the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and
thank you for that.
It's appropriate here to give you a political plug, but
yeah,
I think you got my vote.
Thank you, sir.
So keep up the good work.
That's
Now, if
very
Charles
kind.
is listening, I'm making my decisions on the fly. I might change my mind, but for the moment, I think you're running a really good candidacy, and I think you'd make a promising transhumanist party candidate. So I wish you the best of luck. It's an honor to be interviewed by you.
Thank you, sir. That's so very kind. The Futurist New Deal is something we worked hard on, and I think that I really appreciate that people are able to recognize that we've done the work and are giving it a serious consideration. So thank you.